This is our policy committee meeting for the MPO. We'll call this meeting to order. Do we need to take any type of roll or anything?
No, we're good.
All right. Before we get started, I do want to make a couple presentations to some former board members. We've got them here in person. I'm going to come up here. Mayor Lorenz, might you come up? Yeah, you don't get to just sit back there. Easy out. There's two gentlemen today that have served a long time on the MPO. We need to recognize both of them. Mayor Gary Lorenz from Ankeny served 8 years from 2014 to 2021. He served on the Finance Committee and the Long Range Transportation Plan Committee, also the Executive Committee. I'd just like to thank you for your service and your mentorship, and I appreciate it. So thank you. We got a couple of got a nice size for you. Thank you so much. You bet.
Here, you want a picture?
Oh, yeah, let's take a picture. Our next former committee member is the former mayor of West Moines. He served on our policy committee for 15 years, from 2007 to 2021. He also served as the chair for 2 years and made some legendary changes with our policy and our executive committee. And just, I personally like to thank Steve for all of his mentorship for me. Probably wouldn't be in this position if it wasn't for you. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Joe.
You bet. Nice size. It has the former chair. Thank you. Appreciate that. You bet. Thank you for your service.
Official photo. Okay. Love it. One more. Thanks.
Yeah. You guys are welcome to stay for the meeting if you want to. But I'm sure you got more important things to do.
Retired people happy hour starts.
That's right.
These two are both going somewhere together.
Yeah. I'll make it.
And we'll toast you guys.
Yeah, thank you very much for your service. Item number 2 is a vote on the approval of the agenda.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Abstentions? Motion passes. Item number 3 is a vote on the approval of the meeting minutes from the January 20th meeting. Any discussion? Who was the second?
Reva Norwalk.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Motion passes. Item number 4 is consent and vote on the approval of the financial statement. Todd?
Yeah, it was in your packet, just our normal typical month. Be happy to answer any questions. Would recommend approval.
Any questions for Todd?
I'll move it, Polk County. Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Motion passes. Item number 5 is public comment on any MPO action items. Is there anyone in the public? I know we have one public member here. Is there anyone online that'd like to speak?
I don't believe there is, Joe.
All right. We will move on. Item number 6 is a report and vote on the election of the calendar year of 2022 officers. Todd?
Yep, thank you. The committee met, what was their next slide? Committee met a couple times, discussed the slate of officers for this coming year. They are proposing a slate of Bob Andewig as chair, Stephanie Riva as vice chair, and Ted Weaver as secretary treasurer. Staff and the executive committee, staff would concur with this recommendation, and then the executive committee approved it earlier this month. We would recommend approval. Be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Todd? All great choices. They've all served on the exec for a while, so I'm happy to turn it over to Mayor Anderwig after this meeting.
I'll move it, Polk County.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes. Item number 7 is report and vote on fiscal year 2022, 2025 Transportation Improvement Program amendments. Aspen?
Thank you. We have 5 amendments to consider from DART for approval. They're just moving funds from one fiscal year to another, so they're pretty simple. The first being their radio system replacement project. Next slide. Second, computer hardware. Next slide. Computer software, miscellaneous equipment, and the last one being rideshare vehicle replacement and exploration. So since these are just moving funds from one year to another, I would recommend approval for all 5 to be moved.
Thank you, Aspen. Any questions?
I've got a quick one, and it's for our legal counsel. Since I also sit on the DART board, do I need to abstain on this vote?
I don't think so.
Okay,
So many people wear multiple hats.
okay.
Any other questions or comments? All right, I'd entertain a motion.
I'll move approval.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Motion passes. Item number 8 is report on fiscal year 2022 second quarter budget report. Dylan?
Thank you. Every quarter, the MPO likes to bring this before the board just to keep you up to date on how we're progressing through our budget and where we're expending funds to. So this is everything through the end of December. If you go to the next slide, is a snapshot of this. It was also the full document, or the full page was included in your agenda packet here. So like I said, this is halfway through the year, and you can see over there on the far right the amount remaining by percentage, and most everything we're above 50% on, and those that we are below that are kind of reasonable things. Either we're pretty close, or they're things that we expended kind of earlier on in the year. Some things come later in the year too. So from our perspective, everything looks right on track. We take this information and we use this of how we're trending to help influence the budget, which is what we'll talk about next. But for right now, through this halfway through this year, everything looks good. So if there's any questions, happy to take them. Otherwise, this is just for your information.
Thanks, Dylan. Any questions? All right, move on to item number 9 is report on the fiscal year 2023 Unified Planning Work Program and Budget Development. Dylan?
Yes, thank you. So we've talked to you the last couple of months about the work program and putting that together. If you go to the next slide, just to recap, the work program is our scope of work for the year, has to identify what projects and activities we'll work on, as well as the costs associated with those activities. We've been asking the technical committee and our member governments for ideas for projects, and we'll talk about a couple of those here in a moment. Next month, we'll come forward to the executive committee, because the policy committee does not meet, to approve the draft document. We'll send it off to Iowa DOT, Federal Highway, and Federal Transit, get their comments, and then we'll come back to this group in May with the final document, and we'll keep you abreast of what's happening in the interim too. If you go to the next slide, just in terms of looking at more of the project side of things, Federal Highway and Federal Transit have released emphasis areas for this calendar year, and this is something new that they hadn't really done before. So we talked about this last time, I think, but just to recap, those are climate change, equity and justice, complete streets, virtual public involvement, planning and environmental leakages, and data and transportation planning. So as we work through our work program, we're going to try to make sure we're hitting, showing that we're complying with all of these and hitting those emphasis areas. On the next slide, we have a couple of the projects of note that we're aware of for this year. Some of these are things that we just as staff know that we're going to have to do. Other things have been proposed to us by local governments. So I won't go through all of these, but a couple of them are the passenger transportation plan. That's a required thing that we'll have to have completed next year. We're working on some sidewalk inventory and gap analysis, and that'll be part of the interconnect, the update to the bike ped plan, the interconnect plan that we're working on. A couple of the projects that that's been proposed to us, and one that's not on here because it just came in last week, is to look at the regional corridors from throughout the region. So think of the Northeast Beltway, the Southwest Connector, those kind of things that have been going on for years. And there's different maps out there, and trying to kind of put all those in one place, mainly for the purposes of corridor preservation, so that by the time, if and when those corridors are needed, we don't have developments that have sprung up in them that, you know, landowners and the public and communities are all aware that there might be something there someday so that they can be preserved. So that's something we'll work to put into the long range plan as well. There's still time to solicit or to submit projects to us. We've been asking our tech committee about this, like I said. So we'll still refine that list of projects. This is just kind of the things we're aware of note at the moment. If we go on to the next slides, we'll start getting into the more of the budget side of things. And I wanted to preface that discussion by talking about some grant and contract opportunities, because these will influence the numbers you're going to see in the budget here in a moment. So the US DOT, as we talked about last year, the transportation bill provided additional funding for across a lot of categories. But one of those categories is additional funding to the MPO, and 2 MPOs in our MPO 2. So that the planning funds that we receive are going to increase by about $215,000 over what we've traditionally been receiving, over what's in our budget now, which is a pretty significant amount of money. That's about a 25% increase in the amount of money that we receive. So that's one thing to note. A couple other contracts that we've been discussing, but just to kind of bring those back to the fold here. One is the Economic Development District and the contract that we're going to have with MIPA. As you know, MIPA will be its own organization, but the MPO has led the development and has been heavily involved. MIPA is required to have its own staff person, but we'll bring forward to you in a couple months here, in the next month or two, a contract between the 2 organizations so that the MPO will have oversight for that staff person, as well as provide additional support to that organization for everything else they'll need, ranging from, you know, office supplies and, you know, having an office space, to any other general planning assistance they need above and beyond that one person. So that's something to note too. And then if you go to the final page, the next slide, the final contract we'll talk about is with the Housing Trust Funds. We do have contracts existing with the Story County and the Central Iowa Housing Trust Funds, and that's been going fine. That's basically for their base administration. But now they're starting to seek some additional services. And so those conversations are ongoing, but they're getting to the point where we might receive enough money from those Housing Trust Fund contracts to sustain a new staff person to just work on the housing related aspects of those. So with that, if you go to the next slide, what we're proposing as far as staffing are a couple of things. And just to synthesize what we talked about here already, MIPA would hire its own staff, but that would be housed in the MPO office space. There'd be a contract with the MPO for that. Just to reiterate, no US DOT funds or MPO funds would be used on that staff person or on that contract at all. The MPO, because of the housing things I talked about, because of the increased housing funds and interest, could hire a housing planner. Again, no MPO assessments or DOT funds would be used. It would just be using the additional funding from those contracts. If something were to happen and those contracts don't come to fruition, or those contracts go away, that position would go away. And then one other staffing hire that we're looking at is the hiring of a finance person, finance officer, finance manager, that would be hired with MPO assessment and DOT funds. The reason being, there's just more grant dollars coming in. We do have the additional DOT funds, as I mentioned, but also it just help with our payroll, with managing all these various grants and so forth. This position has been recommended by the finance subcommittee over the last couple of years, and we just didn't have the resources to do it. We have done some things to contract just kind of an hourly basis with an accountant to help oversee some things, but this would allow us to have a permanent position on staff to really, take care of this stuff for us. We used to have a finance position, and when that person left, it wasn't filled. We've kind of done what we can with existing staff to handle it, but it's time now that we think, and we have the resources that we'd like to have that on the staff. So I'll pause there real quick and just see if there's any questions or comments before moving on to showing you some budget figures.
Yeah. Hey, Dylan, Tom Hawkinsmith at Polk County. And just for the group, I would mention that number one, I'm supportive of this, and I'm usually extremely reluctant to add staff, but I think you guys need to do this based on the stuff I've seen over the years. We've had to struggle through issues with this specifically. And so anyway, I'm supportive of it because I think we need as many dollars as you guys are moving through that place. We need it. So I appreciate your work on it.
Thanks, Tom.
Hey, Dylan, I agree with Tom, first of all. Secondly, can you go back to the emphasis areas topic? I'm still unclear on how that's going to manifest. Does that show up in the scoring, in the allocation of funds? What happens if we don't? What standards are set, and who's, I'm just not clear on how this is supposed to play out.
Yeah, and to be fair, I don't know that we know that answer yet either. These were just kind of sent out in a memo saying MPO and DOT are supposed to, look at these emphasis areas. The way we've been looking at it, and we haven't had a lot of discussions, but the way we've been looking at it as staff is these will be things as far as the activities that MPO staff will be working on, not necessarily influencing project funding or SDVG or things like that. So this would just be making sure that, and largely they're things we're already doing. So we're already working with, we joined ICLEI a couple months ago, and there's some climate, greenhouse gas emission inventory things that we can do through that. So that can take care of the climate change one. We already have our environmental justice analysis, and that'll be ongoing. That takes care of the second one. We're already doing work with Complete Streets. So I won't go through everything, but for the most part, we're already complying with this. We're already without having to do anything extra. We'll just want to make sure that we highlight those activities in our work program. If we find out later that we need to do something extra with our funding, that would obviously become a larger discussion with the board, with the funding subcommittee and so forth, because that gets into allocating dollars to our projects and to our member governments, obviously, and would need to be a bigger conversation. But we haven't seen any indication that that is the case yet.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
So Dylan, the next slide where you had sidewalk gaps in there, I know that we've spent a lot of time on inventory in the city of Des Moines with our Move DSM. I'm sure you'll partner with the cities and see what data they already have as far as gap analysis and things like that, and our priorities around schools and priority 1, priority 2, and I know that we're investing a lot of money in a lot of the sidewalk inventory, at least in the city of Des Moines.
Correct. Yeah, we won't be duplicating any efforts that have already been going on. This is really taking the good work that the city of Des Moines has already done and a few other communities have done, and just making sure the whole region has that same level of information.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions before he goes on?
Okay, so getting into the funding and the budget side of things here. So this slide shows you the MPO revenues that we're anticipating. The bulk of our revenue comes from the federal government through the U.S. Department of Transportation. You can see that comes out to about 1.1 million. I will note that this second line there, the Federal Transit Administration dollars, the 123,000, that's about 50,000 less than what we're anticipating getting. The reason being is that even though the transportation bill was approved and those funds were authorized, they have not been appropriated yet. We're still in a continuing resolution for those funds. So per Iowa DOT's advice, we've held back on putting the full amount in there just in case something were to happen and that those aren't appropriated yet. By the time this is in its final version in May, that dollar amount should go up and everything should be set. In terms of non-federal funds, that's our MPO member assessments, which as a reminder is $1 per capita for our member governments. And then the various contracts that we have, SERPA, the anticipated contract with MIPA, the Housing Trust Fund contracts, Watershed Management Authority, and then we currently have a contract that was approved last month with Marion County, and we'll see that work continuing the next fiscal year too. If you go to the next slide, one thing that isn't included in that previous slide showing revenue sources, but something that we'll put in our budget just so that the audit makes sense at the end of the year, is the flow through funding for the water trails projects. And there's a couple different sides to that. There's the SDBG funds. That's a smaller amount that the MPO has made available to that project, as well as the $25 million build grant from the US DOT, and then the matching funds for both of those. So all told, that's almost $32 million. If we put that into our normal, cash flow, that just throws everything out of whack compared to our $2 million budget. So in the work program, we show that those are there, kind of note that they're separate. And that way when we do the audit at the end of the year, the auditors are happy because it was in our budget, and all that flow through costs that we'll see kind of makes sense, and they don't get angry with us. So just wanted to point that out. And then on the next slide looks at sorry, I might have had two slides and they're showing the same thing. The next slide looks at the expenditure side of things. Most of our expenditures are for personnel costs, so salaries, wages, fringe benefits, and so forth, as well as indirect costs, so general costs such as facilities, supplies, office, the things that keep the office up and going. And then there's a couple of non-personnel direct costs. Those are special projects such as consultant fees for our travel demand model or strategic planning, those kind of things. So all told, at the end of the year, or at the end of the day, with our balance showing a $55,000, almost $56,000 balance, like I said, we're not showing all of our federal funds in there yet either. So we will have a pretty significant carryover. And one thing we'll probably want to have conversations in the next month or two is what to do with that balance. There are some special projects that might come down the line that we could spend those on. We've also been starting to purchase new trail counters, so we can continue that project and purchase more trail counters too. I would note, sorry, there's one more slide, I think, just real quick before I forget. Just in case, just for any questions out there about what MPO staff is spending their time on. So if we remove just the MIPA employee and the Housing Trust Fund employee, you can see that 90% of the MPO, the existing staff, kind of our core MPO staff's time, is going to MPO activities. So just wanted to point that out too. The MPO's finance subcommittee met last week and reviewed all this information and seemed supportive of it. They were supportive of it, including the staffing things we just talked about a moment ago too. So like I said, next month we'll come forward with a full work program that will include the activities as well as the budget side of things for you to review, send that off to DOT, and then we'll go from there in terms of revising that for a final version. So that's a lot of information, but if there's any questions, please let me know and I'll try to answer them.
Dylan, thank you. Any questions for Dylan? Good presentation. I heard none. We'll move on to item 10 is a report on fiscal year 2026 surface transportation block grant and TAP applications. I think Zach and Aspen are going to tag team this and give us an update.
Yes, thank you. Just want to give you a quick update on the SDBG applications for federal fiscal year 2026. Applications were due back on January 7th. We received a total of 15 applications. 5 of those were in the system capacity category, 5 under major reconstruction replacement. We had 3 bridge projects submitted and then 1 each for system optimization and 1 for transit. In your agenda packet is a list of those projects broken out by those categories. In total, we have SDBG requested of a little over $28.3 million for this cycle, and we're anticipating about $13 million in funding. We have not received that final number from the DOT yet, but we expect to get that probably sometime at the end of the month. Next slide, please. This slide just has a table that shows you all those projects that were submitted. See, we have 1 from Altoona, a couple from Ankeny, Clive, Dart, 4 from Des Moines, 5 from Des Moines, Grimes, 4 from Polk County, Waukee, a couple from West Des Moines, and 1 from Windsor Heights. Next slide.
We received 4 TAP applications this year. All 4 that were submitted are trail or share these path projects. We had, I think the next slide shows the applications. We had Des Moines, West Des Moines, Polk County, and Ankeny apply for just over $3 million. So we have, I think on the next slide, we'll talk about our timeline.
So the schedule moving forward on February 24th, so next Thursday, we'll be having applicant presentations before the funding subcommittee. This will give the applicants a chance to present their projects and provide any additional information that they would like to. It'll also provide the funding subcommittee with an opportunity to ask any questions they have regarding each of the projects that have been submitted for funding. In the next week or so, we'll be working to schedule a follow-up meeting sometime probably in mid-March for the funding subcommittee to meet and develop their recommendation for awards. And then we'll bring that recommendation back to the April meetings. And then finally, we'll bring them back to the May meetings for final approval. I think that is my last slide. If you have any questions about the projects or the process, I'd be happy to take those questions at this time.
Thank you, Zach. Thank you, Aspen. Anyone have any questions for either one of them?
Yeah, quick question. So Zach, can you give me a little context around the scoring? For example, like the system capacity has a base score of 15, whereas the reconstruction has a base score of 45. How does that work?
Yeah, so this is the first year under some changes we made to the scoring system. So I think we made these changes probably last summer. The reason was what we were seeing in the scores was traditionally a lot of very low scores. So we wanted to develop kind of a base score to go along with the score based on the criteria from the long range plan. So the system capacity, the major reconstruction replacement, and the system optimization each have a base score. And we ran this through committees, and essentially the reasoning that we came to for each of those different numbers, the 15 I think for system capacity, 30 for, or is it 45 for major reconstruction, and then 30 for system optimization, was to kind of put those kind of in line with our long range plan and the priorities in our long range plan. And since our long range plan prioritizes addressing our current system and making sure that we're taking care of our existing system, that's why the major reconstruction and the optimization got higher points in their base score. And that is essentially what the justification for those numbers is.
So I guess I can get that. I guess where I'm now struggling is, how do you define what is a major reconstruction versus a system capacity? I could look at the Highway 6 interchange at 3580 as a full reconstruction of that entire interchange. So why is that classified as capacity versus reconstruction, and therefore given 3 times less the base points?
So one of the questions in the application is project type. And so essentially any of the projects that were submitted and included the project type road widening, those were automatically classified in the system capacity category. If they did not include road widening, that's what put them into the reconstruction category.
And were the applicants made aware of that?
Specifically, probably not.
Yeah. So when the subcommittee reviews this, are the recommendations going to be based just purely on score, the highest wins kind of thing?
No.
No, it never is.
Okay, how does that work then, Todd?
The committee review is, here's the staff will make a recommendation. They'll have the presentations from the member communities, and then they'll get together, that committee, and make a recommendation based on those factors, plus just how they think the money should be divided out. So there's a lot of other factors that play into it besides the points. I doubt that in my time at the MPO that just solely based on points, I don't think we've ever given funding just solely based on the points. It's always been other external factors that have been put on top of that, that the committee's then made a recommendation based on that.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. We'll move on to item number 11 is a report on the Purple Heart Highway update from Todd.
Yeah, just real quick, we're still working with the DOT to schedule some of the meetings for communities along the corridor, their stakeholder meetings, so they can generate their stakeholder report. We're also having some conversations with the partnership on legislation. Andy, if you're still on, I haven't been able to get a hold of Stu, but if you could relay the message that we really need to get at least Altoona scheduled sooner than later, that would be great.
Well, I can send him a note also.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Thanks.
Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Todd. Any questions? All right, item 12 is a water trails update from Todd.
Yeah, thank you. We're still working with our partners. As we mentioned previously, we didn't receive any bids when we had the first letting of this project back in December. So the design team went back through and in consultation with, we talked with some of the contractors that were thinking about bidding but didn't, what their concerns were. And so we revised several things. One of the main ones was the dewatering plan around the Scott Avenue Bridge, how we control the water as they're doing construction, some of the materials used along the various sites, and some of the construction access. And so we redid that. We actually had a pre-bid meeting yesterday morning that went, I think, very well. We had over 18 contractors and subcontractors, and on that call seemed to be a lot more interest. We also, as that last bullet shows, we're putting this in a special letting at the end of March. So pulling this out of the normal DOT letting schedule. So this will be the only project in this letting. So the contractors aren't working on other projects while they're looking at this one. That seems to be also drawing interest as well. So we'll have the letting again at the end of March, and we anticipate getting some bids this go around, and we'll see where we're at that point. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Todd. Any questions, comments? All right, item 13 is report on the Economic Development District update from Gunner.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good to be before you again. If you haven't heard yet, it is official. The Mid-Iowa region is an economic development district now. We received notice from the Assistant Secretary of Commerce over the Economic Development Administration on January 26th that designation has been given. We knew all along this was going to be kind of a long slog, and last 3 months were a wait and see. We anticipated this time, but it was really reaffirming to get that. So just to recap where we are at is that we are now on the cusp of reaching phase 4. We have wide support. We created the entity, put in for the designational materials, and now we're one step away from launching operations. Shortly behind the designation, we did get the invitation to apply for the partnership program. This is the funding program that we've been talking about the entire time. It is invitation only though, and so this is one of those things that we anticipated, but are really glad to get that invitation. It's a 3-year grant for $210,000, breaks down to $70,000 annually. This is the match money that is being used to pay for the staffing that Dylan talked about previously. To date, 45 jurisdictions have indicated to us that they will be joining for the inaugural 15-month period. We did put a deadline of February 15th to hear from those jurisdictions. And as I said, 45 have shown up so far. We are over our our hoped goal here. So we're in a very positive position based on what we had projected earlier. So I want to mention a little bit on the contract that we talked about. The background on that, as Dylan mentioned earlier, is Vivint will directly hire one senior planner as its staff, but then will also contract with the MPO for the balance of its needs as an organization. So that contract is being drafted now, and we wanted to outline it with you so you're aware of what's being put together. Basically, the MPO is going to provide and manage all the administrative functions. So Todd, as our supervisor, will oversee hiring, firing, et cetera. MPO will handle human resources, accounting, auditing, et cetera, and then also provide planning services. And this is beneficial for both parties because it does give them access to broader expertise, the MPO staff members, and different specialties, and allows them to have excess capacity if their funding allows. On the annual cost of the contract, total award is going to be about $60,000, including indirect costs, the planning support, and again, as Dylan mentioned, we're talking less than 1% of MPO staff time in audit, as well as admin support. We're posting the opening. That might even be live today. We were finalizing it just this morning. And first round interviews we hope to be able to do in late February or early March, and then second round interviews if needed in early March. And then we hope to be able to make an offer by mid-March and have them ready to start on April 1 when that partnership program kicks in. Last thing I'll mention is that we did assist 4 jurisdictions with applications for our American Rescue Plan funding. We advised a few other jurisdictions, but 4 ended up submitting. Jurisdictions in this room and online all had applications. So I did want to report back to you that we learned from the Denver region that they received $90 million in requests from the Travel and Tourism Program. All 4 of the local applications were to that program. It has $19 million to spend, so you can do the math. They've got 10 states. They want to do about 2 awards per state. So I was looking at, maybe 2 awards, about $1 million a piece. And Iowa has 7 applications total, 4 from the region. So we're feeling pretty confident that at least 1 and potentially 2 could get funded here. They're all really good projects. So we're feeling positive about that. I know the Denver region feels positive about the projects they received. We would anticipate knowing where these awards get by the end of March. That's it for me, unless I can answer any questions.
Gunnar, thank you. Good work. Anyone have any questions for Gunnar? All right, thanks again. Item 14 is a report on the transload facility update. Zach?
Thank you. Just a quick update on where we're at with the transload facility. We're wrapping things up. The railroads have signed off on the track. Ryan Companies demobilized a few weeks ago. One thing that Gabe mentioned to me was that they're very proud of the safety record on the project. I believe they had over 55,000 working hours and they had no injuries throughout the whole development of the project. So something Gabe wanted me to highlight to everyone. They are currently working on a lot of customer meetings. I know they met with probably about 8 different companies last week. I'm sure they're continuing to schedule meetings with potential customers and clients. The first load was delivered a few days ago. It was a load of rebar. I've got a video to share with you here in a minute of that load of rebar coming in. As far as reporting on the MPO side, we have a few additional things to do. We have a quarterly report that's due at the end of January that's been submitted. We'll have one more that we have to submit. The last report is technically due at the end of April, but we can submit it following the final reimbursement request. So once that final reimbursement request comes to us, we'll be able to submit that final quarterly report. And then we will have a final performance report that we have to submit along with that to the FRA. Next slide, please. So here's the video of the rebar coming in. So kind of exciting to get to see the first delivery coming into the site. The next few images are just a few that Gabe sent over capturing that load of rebar coming in. Nothing really too much to explain here, but just gives you a chance to see what this delivery looks like. And I think there's one of them unloading it. I think there might be, okay. As far as the bill grant closeout goes, as I mentioned, we have so far reimbursed for a little over $10.7 million of the 11.2. We have $468,000 left in federal funds to reimburse for. We're waiting for Des Moines Industrial to submit that last request to us. And once they do, we'll be able to submit that and then complete the final quarterly report and that final performance report that I mentioned earlier. And once those are done, the FRA will consider the project closed out. And all we'll have left to do for the build grant portion of things is submit an annual report noting our performance measures that we outlined in the grant agreement and how we're meeting those performance measures. Next slide. On the RRLG funds, we did submit the final reimbursement requests for the remaining RRLG funds. There were $531,000 left in that. The Iowa DOT will need to come out to the site and do a site visit before they can close out the project. We're in the process of working with Des Moines Industrial to get that site visit scheduled. Following Iowa DOT closeout, they'll be able to release the $170,000 in retainage that they've been holding on to throughout each reimbursement. That'll be released back to us and we can turn around and get that back to Des Moines Industrial. I think maybe I have one more slide that kind of just outlines the schedule. The warehouse, as I mentioned, is operational, as well as the track, which has been signed off by the railroad. We did meet our schedule for closing out the project in March. We're on track to do that. They did receive their temporary certificate of occupancy from the city. Their formal certificate will have to wait until May. They have to wait until the landscaping is completed, and they need to wait until the weather gets a little bit better to finish up that landscaping. But they're anticipating that they'll get that formal certificate from the city in May. And I believe that's all I have. I'd be happy to take any questions you have.
I think Carl had a question for you.
Sure. Do you have a backstory on the rebar? I mean, where did it come from, or where's it going to, or just any tidbits there? Just curiosity.
That's a great question. I actually am not sure where that rebar was coming from or where it was going to. It's certainly something we can find out and report back at the next meeting, though. Those were not details that Gabe provided to me.
Or maybe even tell us, like, how many truckloads that would be, just by comparison, what that would have taken to trucking it. So
absolutely.
Gabe he did mention that, and I believe it was I think you saw there were 4 rail cars there with rebar on them. And I believe what Gabe told us at the meeting with the FRA a couple weeks ago was that to bring that on a truck, it probably would have taken at least 10 to 12 trucks to get that rebar in.
All right. Anything else? Zach, thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 15 is a report on the legislative update from Dylan.
Thank you. Got a quick update on the federal side of things, and I've got a couple state bills we're looking at. So as I mentioned under the budget item, we're still under a continuing resolution. It's supposed to go through tomorrow. There was a bill filed last week, and I haven't checked on that to see if anything happened, but that was to extend it out through early March. So we might be under a continuing resolution for a little bit here, but hopefully that'll get handled sooner rather than later, so that we have access to all the federal funding that was in that infrastructure bill late last year. On the state side of things, there's a couple bills that we're looking at. The first one there, HSB 536, I talked about this one last month. This would kind of eliminate the ability of cities and counties to regulate stormwater through ordinances and so forth. I think I incorrectly said the bill was dead. The bill is not dead. The bill was just returned back to the committee without a vote, so it's still there. So I wanted to clarify that. There's a couple other bills here. SF 2206, everyone's probably familiar with. This is the big tax bill that has a lot of impacts for local option sales tax, as well as other tax implications. The thing that is of interest to this group potentially is it would fund the Natural Resource and Outdoor Recreation Fund, or IWIL. And there's a lot of water trail implications to that. So good thing that that bill might be passed, or that fund might be actually have funding into it. Though I know everyone's kind of nervous about the tax implications there as well. So we'll have to see what happens. There's at least 4 bills that have been filed that deal with automated traffic enforcement, so dealing with traffic cameras and so forth. 2 of those bills would just outline procedures for their use, and the other 2 would ban their use. As the funnel comes up, we'll have to see what shakes out and kind of how things move forward. But right now, we're just kind of watching those. Senate Study Bill 3070 deals with port authorities, and just something that kind of caught our eye. Not sure if there's any rhyme or reason to why that was actually filed, if someone has some plans, but it just makes it a little bit easier to form port authorities, and it kind of deals with their powers and financing abilities. And then one more recent one at the bottom there, Senate Study Bill 3134, could impact trail development. It places caps on the price that a county conservation board or the Iowa DNR can pay for the acquisition of public lands. That's how they get their lands for trails. So if they're restricted in how much they can pay a landowner, that might mean they can't purchase that land for trails and so forth. So that's something that I know a lot of the trail advocate groups are nervous about too. So something we'll keep our eye on. I know others in this room are probably much more familiar with some of these bills than I am. So if there's anybody who wants to add anything or clarify anything, please feel free. But otherwise, those are the ones that we're kind of looking out at.
Thanks, Dylan. Any questions or comments? All right. Item number 16 is report on upcoming events from Gunner.
Hello again, just one event to share with you this afternoon. This comes courtesy of Andy Lunan. So Andy, please feel to jump in here if you want to do any additional pitch beyond this. Conference called Growing Transportation Mobility for All coming up in July at the Iowa Event Center. But there is early bird rates that apply if you register before March 15th. Link is on the screen, and we will follow up with an email with the link as well. Andy, anything you want to add?
No, not really. I think, if you guys are interested, it's geared more towards transportation professionals, but it's a pretty good conference and great way to network with folks that are doing the same thing. There'll be a lot of state governments there. Masto is part of greater, it's about 7 states, maybe more. I'd have to look and just to get back, but I'm on part of the conference committee, so been involved. There'll be a golf outing and stuff like that at the UNC, and some night outings and things that are pretty good. One night we'll be taking everyone over to Smash Park and having an event over there with some dueling pianos and stuff like that. So they try to make some night things pretty good too. So it'll be a good place to showcase, and there may be some talk about a walking tour that I might need to get with some MPO staff on this, but we'll work on that in the future. Thanks, Gunnar.
That's it for me.
Anything else? All right. Thank you. Thanks, Andy. Item number 17 is other non-action items of interest to the committee. Todd, do you have anything?
Yeah, I just had one. I wanted to thank Joe for his time as chair. It's been an unusual time to be chair for sure. I think he only had one meeting where we were all in person. So I appreciate you stepping in through this and your leadership during this time, Joe. So just wanted to thank you.
Thanks. It's been my pleasure. Hopefully I can hand it over to Bob and we'll all get back into person again and we can continue to have some interaction together during the meeting and after the meeting. I know it's tough to do a hybrid, but it's always nice to see people's faces.
Joe, I just want to add as incoming chair, thank you for all you've done, and I've got big shoes to fill, so thank you for your service as chair. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mayor. Anything else? Does anybody have anything else? All right. Todd, is this correct? Our next meeting is March 17th. I thought we didn't have a meeting in March. Is that right or no?
No, the policy does not have a March meeting, so.
Right, so so our next meeting is
Typo
in
there.
April.
Yeah.
Our next meeting is in April.
Yeah,
And the
for
date,
this-
do
Correct.
we have a date, in April?
It is April 21st.
Okay, April 21st at 4 o'clock. If there's nothing else, this meeting's adjourned. Thank you.